Hello and welcome to the Iron Maiden. My name is Abby and today I'm going to show you how to count in Vynnset. This video is going to assume that you know how to play Flesh and Blood, and it's also going to assume that you're somewhat aware of Vynnset's basic playstyle and a lot of her cards. If you are not very aware of Vynnset or her cards, I have a beginner's guide that will catch you up with anything you need to know for this video. If you do not know how to count, this is going to be a very difficult video for you to watch. I'd recommend finding a primary school teacher or a parent to help you. So fab math is a well-documented concept where you can equate certain cards to certain values and decide if that makes them good or bad. Since your average card blocks for 3, we assume that your average hand is worth 12 value. If you blocked with them all, you would get 12 value in block. So if you attack with them all, you should hopefully get more. And that's because when you block, you're not using action points. When you attack, if your attack doesn't have go again, it should be worth more, both because it will consume an action point, and also so that the game is more based on attacking and less based on defending. Because if everything was a 4 block and every attack attacked for 4, then we would have a very stale game. So we can see here on the screen 4 Raging Onslaughts. The red is for 7, the yellows are for 6, and the blue is for 5. So the best way to use this hand, and it's very simple if you've played this game at all, is to block with the 2 yellows, pitch the blue, and swing the red one. So you would get 6 block and 7 attack, meaning you have gone to 13 value and overrate. That's great. We maximized our value. If instead we block with the red and the yellow, pitch the blue and swing with the second yellow, we would get 12 value. Not as good, of course. And if we would do something really silly, like block with the red and pitch the 2 yellows to attack with the blue one, we would be getting 8 value and going severely under rate. So it's pretty simple to look at these types of hands and understand how to get the most value out of it. There's also on-hits to consider, because they change math in significant ways. BIOS Update recently made a tempo video in which they describe snatches and CNCs. So in that video, he says snatches are cards that benefit you and push your game plan forward, and CNCs are cards that benefit you by slowing your opponent down or making their game plan worse, basically. So if we look at Snatch, it's a 0 for 4, so it's a 1 card 4 damage, not bad, and it gets roughly 3 value on hit, because every card is worth roughly 3 value. Now that could be higher or lower, which is why it's roughly 3. CNC is a 2 card 6, so technically you're getting a slightly worse rate than Snatch, although you do get roughly 3 minus value to your opponent on hit. Because cards in Arsenal are typically good cards, people don't typically Arsenal bad cards, you can often equate a little bit more on hit value to Command and Conquer, and that means that you can bring that value up a little bit. It's also got the defense reaction text, which is also pretty good value. If you can't actually play all the cards in your hand, you're going to lose value. This is important to understand for Vynnset because it's somewhat common. So if your opponent doesn't attack you on this turn when you have your 4 Raging Onslaughts, the best you can do is attack for 7. The other 2 cards in your hand will go to waste unless you arsenal them. So we're going to get into arsenaling and moving value from turn to turn, both in simple ways like arsenaling and complex ways like maybe Runechants. So obviously this hand is restrained by action points and it doesn't equate to much value once your opponent stops attacking you. If you had this hand instead, you can play flying high, play your Raging Onslaught by pitching, and then play your Wounding Blow for a total of 7, 8, because of the fly high, plus 9, 10, 11, 12 from your Wounding Blow. So you're getting your average value without losing anything, even if your opponent doesn't attack you. The downside to this is that non-attacks, or things that have go again, often have lower block or lower rate. So for example, flying high blocks for 2. And that's only really worth 1 value on its own, assuming you're playing a red card. So it's not a high value card, but it unlocks playing more cards, which means it has some relevance and contextual value. The arsenal is of course the other way to build value. So if you instead block with the Raging Onslaughts, both of them, you play Wounding Blow, and then you arsenal flying high, you're getting 6 block, 4 attacks, you're up to 10. Arsenaling flying high, you could consider a average card is worth 3, so that's up to 13. Flying high could be very powerful on a later turn, so you're getting a little bit more value. And that choice is going to depend on where in the game you are. If you want to attack your opponent because they're getting low, or because they're not blocking and you just want to get them lower, then you might be attacking for 12. If they're attacking you and you're still kind of in the mid-rangey or middle game area, maybe it's best to arsenal that fly high to set up. Now, Vin math is a little bit tricky. Vynnset has the best math in the game on some turns, and the worst math in the game in a lot of other turns. So as you can see on this graph I've made, the dark purple aggro matchups will start high, keep high for multiple turns, and then drop off steeply. This is because in aggro matchups, we want consistency. So if you're playing well, if the deck is working, you're going to get up to value very quickly, and you're going to keep it until you run out of your consistency, and then once you run out of consistency, it's going to be very hard. In the mid-range, or the decks that block and attack, the light pink, we're going to start a little bit lower because we might need to do some setup. We're going to have a medium spike. We're going to go back to mediocre low. Then we're going to have a little bit of a drop off. So in mid-range, we might have 1 to 2 turns of power, and we are using that spike to drive us into the end game where we can finish it. And then in the orange, you can see the blocking matchups. We really need to take horrible value for the early portion of the game. And then we do a massive spike. Then we go back to horrible so we can get a second spike in. Typically, you can only find about 2 spikes. You might get 3 in very long games. But you can see that we're basically always trading now for later. So if you're being consistent, you are trading, you're getting now and you're trading the end game. If you're going for blocking matchups, you're trading the now and you're gaining the spike later. And that's what makes Vynnset so tricky to understand on a math side. So let's go through some easy math. Runegate is one of the most value-based abilities in the game. That's because it double dips Runechants. The Runechants are inherently worth 1 arcane damage, but in Runegate's case, they also pay for the card, effectively. So you are getting 2 value per Runechant. So for Phantom Banshee, you get a 1 card 10, assuming that you had Runechants before your start of your turn, or you could make them. So you banish and you play Phantom Banshee with your 3 Runechants at minimum, it goes for 10. If you are playing something like Widespread Destruction, you're getting 9 damage, but you're banishing your opponent's arsenal on hit. So you're getting a 9 plus 3, roughly, on damage. That's notable as well. Vynnset's Runegate cards don't say on hit, they actually all say on damage. So if your opponent loses life from a Runechant, when you close the chain, they're going to banish their arsenal. There are some of these cards that you would consider snatchers, as in they benefit Vynnset and they push her plan forward. And there are some you would consider CNCs, like Widespread Destruction, very obvious CNC, as it kills your opponent's arsenal. Pretty simple. Go Again is also an important part of Vynnset's deck, because basically none of her cards actually have Go Again, none of the attacks. So you're going to end up with cards like Morph Skies in your deck, or similar cards to gain action points to give the attack go again. But calculating the value of this is a little tricky. So Morph Skies at absolute worst is worth 1 resource as a red, which isn't a lot. In Vynnset, it's not too bad, but it's not great. You get +3 damage on hit because you're getting 3 Runechants, so that's pretty good. You get Go Again, which, like we said, is very contextual. Let's value it at 1 minimum for now. And we get 2 block if we're going to block with it instead. So to make playing Morvrian Skies worth it, we have to get more than 2 value. Otherwise we might as well have blocked with it. So we need the Go Again to be worth more than 2, or we need the on hit to trigger. Now, getting Morph Skies to trigger is actually very hard. People always block it. So your Morph Skies ends up feeling like it's worth very little if you don't get multiple attacks off. So you can see how this Go Again is very contextual and strange to count, which is why I'm making this video, because I think it's an interesting topic because of the complexity. Blood Debt is also important to remember. If you don't have enough Runechants to play your attack, you can't Runegate, and that means that you will be taking Blood Debt at the end of your turn. So if you banish Deathly Wail, and you have 2 Runechants, then you're going to take a damage and do nothing else. So was your turn worth -1? That would be the most basic way to look at it. Your turn is worth -1, you get 1 Runechant, so maybe you could value that at net 0. You get 1 and you lose 1. Not great, but really, you're carrying that value into next turn, because that Deathly Wail is still there in your banish zone. And next turn, when you get a 3rd Runechant from Vynnset's ability, and maybe you can double Runegate, you're going to make all that value back up. So instead of now being worth 0, your turn was actually kind of worth 3. You're moving that value into next turn. But we need to make sure we don't double count this stuff. If you count the Deathly Wail as 3 on the first turn, and then you count it as its damage on the second turn, well, you're double counting value. And then you're going to be really confused really quickly. Let's look at Funeral Moon as an example of a card that has a strange amount of value. So at very basic levels, it's worth 1 resource, because it's red, which is okay. It's worth 3 block, which is pretty good for a 9 attack, and it can make 1 Runechant. So on surface, blocking with Funeral Moon is always the correct play, unless you can't, like if your opponent doesn't attack you. That makes Funeral Moon a pretty bad card, because most cards block for 3 and are better to play, or are okay to play. In this way, Funeral Moon looks pretty bad. The floor is 1 Runechant or 1 resource, and the ceiling is 3 block. Doesn't seem very worth running. Let's look at this comparison turn we had before. If I'm counting my Banish and Pass turn as net neutral, I got 0 value total because I lost 1 and made 1. Whatever the other cards in my hand do, whatever, I IP them, as in I don't use them, or maybe I block with them. And then on my next turn, I do 17 damage, plus 1 life, so 18 value. Is this a 9 card average, a 9 damage average over 2 turns? That's an okay way to look at it. Is this a bad turn and a good turn? That's an okay way to look at it. So we're getting into some complex topics in the medium math. What's the best way to calculate this value? Should I consider bad turns and good turns? Or should I consider average value over time? Well, that's going to change depending on what decks you're facing against. Against an aggro deck, like for example Syndra, I might be more willing to count it as average value over time, because what matters is having a higher average than them. That's really the best way to win against aggro decks. But having a higher average over a defensive deck isn't going to help Vynnset. We're going to get into that later, but basically it's important to know Big turns and small turns are very important to Vynnset beating fatigue decks. So this is a highly contextual, once again, way to look at the deck. Let's look at Go Again for a second time. We already said Go Again was highly contextual. If I have no cards in hand, I can actually always swing Flail. Since Flail costs 1 life, unless I've got 1 life, I can always attack with it after, presuming I have a action point. So in the first example with Deathly Wail, I'm attacking for 5 and 2 Runechant, so that's 7. Then I pay 1 life and deal 1 damage with Flail. I get my Runechant, let's say all that goes swimmingly. So I'm getting 5, 6, 7, and then 1 damage from the Flail is 8, 9 from getting a Runechant. And then I get my life back, and I get a spare life, so it's kind of like 10. So I'm getting a 2-card 10, which is pretty good, assuming everything hits. But if I have on the second option, Deathly Wail with Go Again, so it's 5, 6, 7 from the Runechants, and then I pitch and play Phantom Wraith for an extra 6. So in that case, I'm getting a 4-card, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, which is pretty good too. It's averagely good. So we're getting contextual value out of that Go Again. Sometimes it is better to use Flail and block with the other 2 cards. Sometimes you don't get that option and it's best to play that Phantom Wraith. And sometimes you can go absolutely ham with spare Runegate cards in your banish zone. So like we showed up here, banishing that card and waiting the turn can make this turn really, really good. Let's imagine instead with the second example, instead of pitching and playing my Phantom Wraith, I have 2 Runechants for the Deathly Delight, and I get 2 Runechants for Phantom Wraith, and Phantom Wraith is in my banish zone. So instead I'm going 5, 6, 7 on the Deathly Delight, and then 6, 7, 8 on the Phantom Wraith, and I'm not pitching a card, so I'm getting a 7 plus 8, I'm getting a 15 out of 3 cards. Suddenly my math is extremely good. So that Go Again can be worth anywhere from 1 to 2, to maybe 6, if you're counting the Phantom Wraith and the pitch. Maybe you count that as 3 each. And then you would be counting a massive turn with extra Runegates. Maybe it's worth 3, 4, 5. It's hard to say. Let's talk more about Flail, because it's a really strange card. One of my favorite cards ever made, but it is really weird. Flail by itself costs you 1 life and does 1 damage, so it's net neutral. That's not a very good weapon. But if it hits your opponent, you get a Runechant. So on its face, it's -1 for you and 2 damage to them. 1 now and 1 later. That's a little bit better. It shows Vynnset to be a very aggressive deck, or a deck that wants to accelerate the game. It wants to get the game done earlier. That might be the way to look at it. But Flail of Agony's real power is just that you can pay life. That's the thing that it does, in my eyes. So with Phantom Wraith, assuming you have Go Again, it doesn't do anything if you've lost life, so it just gets its base value of 1 to 2, assuming you hit. Or 0 to 2, assuming you hit. If you are swinging Deathly Delight, it refunds you the life. So instead of getting -1 for up to 2 value, you're getting 0 for up to 2 value. Pretty good. And Deathly Wail gets you +1 Runechant. So that turns from -1 for up to 2 to -1 to 1 guaranteed up to 2 extra if it hits. That's pretty good too. It's actually up to 3 extra because Deathly Wail will also trigger its both people have lost life to make 2 Runechants. So Flail can be worth up to 3 or 4 value depending on what attack you have last chain. This is why you'll often see Vynnset swinging Flail with their spare action point, but never on the turns where they don't have an attack. So if you banish a card and attack with Flail and do nothing else, Flail's pretty bad. It throws away your Runechants, loses you a life, they're probably going to block it. But if you use it with one of the Runegates, suddenly you're getting extra value from their abilities. I also want to say that Flail's value can be calculated in the sense that your opponent has to block it. So like Morphsky, as we talked about before, it has damage on hit, potential damage. If your opponent blocks that out, you don't get the potential damage, which makes it sound like it's worth very little. But you have to remember, your opponent's giving you a card, and in the case of Flail, you are not using a card at all. So you pay 1 life, and your opponent discards a card. You could consider Flail to say that. That would be a pretty decent weapon. Unfortunately, because it only attacks for 1, it's pretty easy for armor to block Flail. So if you're getting a card out of your opponent's hand from your Flail, that's also very, very valuable. If your opponent is using armor to block it, they're not spending anything, and you're basically just losing life for nearly nothing. So that's not so good. That's another reason you have to use Flail contextually. You're going to hear that word a lot. Now we're looking at some moving value again. I need to not double count my value. So if we look at Deathly Wail, it does 9 damage, assuming you have the 3 Runechants and it does 6 physical. And if you deal damage to your opponent, it gets you +1. So if I count that as 10 damage, 9 now and 1 later, I have a 10 value turn. That's pretty good for 1 card. Next turn, I'll have that Runechant still. If I count that again, I've double counted, which is not going to help you understand the deck. So should I count it now or later? Same with Read the Runes. It's 0 value now, because it doesn't have go again, you can't do anything afterwards, and +3 next turn? Well, is that worth counting that way? I think it is worth counting it as next turn potential. Vynnset's biggest gameplay pattern is thinking about next turn. Deathly Wail is so strong because it nearly guarantees that next turn will have a Runegate possibility. Read the Runes is basically guaranteeing it even more unless you don't draw a Runegate. It powers out any Runegate card we currently have. In Deathly Wail's case, we're moving a little bit of it and still getting good value. In Read the Runes case, we're moving all of it. We're having a very low value turn this turn, and a +3 to next turn. So you can see how these would be different in aggro and fatigue, because they care more about spreading out the damage average or spiking. Vynnset has this interesting game plan of thinking about the future, as I said, and specifically moving Runechants from turn to turn. Going into a turn with 0 Runechants is a little bit risky. So a Runechant now is often worse than a Runechant next turn. What I mean by that is, if we look at the diagram on the bottom left, I have my Deathly Wail with go again, I get my Malefic trigger to get 1, and I swing my Eloquent Eulogy afterwards. I have 2 possibilities here. I can break the chain in between to get 1 Runechant, and then that Runechant will go into the Eloquent Eulogy attack. So that's +1 value this turn. Or I can close the chain afterwards, and I can get 1 value for next turn. So in the first case, I'm getting 6, 7, 8, 9, and then 10 from the Malefic, then 14 from the Eloquent physical damage, and I can either go to 15 or I can stay at 14 and move 1 to next turn. So let's look at the 2 possible futures. In option 1, I use the Runechant on that turn. Next turn, I banish a 2 cost, I lose 1 life, I get 1 Runechant, and I move some of the value into next turn. In option 2, where I make it at the end of the first turn, on the second turn, I banish this card, the Phantom Wraith, and I play it for 8 damage, and I don't carry any value into the future turns. Which one is better? Well, it depends on what you're playing against. Option 1 is likely to be better against a more mid-range or fatiguing deck, as in a deck that likes to block. In this way, we're getting more value in a spike, and then we're getting a small turn, so we can spike again. In option 2, it's likely to be better against a more aggro-y deck, or a deck that doesn't like to block. We're getting consistent damage and we're not taking any blood debt. So moving value from turn to turn is an important skill to have, but generally, moving a Runechant into next turn is more worth it than not, because Runegating in a double is obviously very strong in some decks, but Runegating consistently is also a way to win against most decks. Now, paying life is a bit of a complex topic as well. When you pay life with Vynnset, you're guaranteeing the damage will be dealt to your opponent. But really, you're getting negative value because you are paying 1, so that's -1, and you're not gaining a damage. You're just guaranteeing they can't block that 1. So in some sense, it's 1 for 1, but really it's more like -1 for 0.5 value. That being said, if you're triggering Runegate abilities, suddenly the value goes up significantly. So let's look at Deathly Delight in the bottom left. It refunds me the life. So I can pay life pretty freely because I'm going to get it back. So really it just guarantees they're going to lose life, which means that my Deathly Delight will go +1 when they lose life. That's pretty good. Let's look at Deathly Wail. I get 2 Runechants because I've lost life and they've lost life. When I play a Deathly Wail and I have a Shadow non-attack, I'm thinking to myself, in this situation, would I pay 1 life to make 1 Runechant? If you play Magic the Gathering, it's a little bit like having a Necropotence. Would I pay 1 life to get 1 thing? I think it's worth it in most cases, so I'll do that. In Widespread Destruction's case, do they have an arsenal? Maybe it's worth paying life to guarantee they take that damage, to guarantee to get their arsenal. Do I have an arsenal? If I pay life, Widespread Destruction will banish my arsenal. Sometimes that's really bad. Sometimes that's really good, because I have a Runegate in arsenal that I don't want in there. So Widespread Destruction getting really, really complex. Let's consider the second option for Widespread Destruction. Does my opponent have a good card in arsenal or a bad card? Does my opponent have a D-React in arsenal? If they have a D-React or a bad card, it doesn't matter. The D-React they'll play before it gets banished, and the bad card, they don't care about it going away. If they have a good card, they do care about it going away. So now I have to consider, what's my opponent arsenaling? Let's go to the third layer for Widespread Destruction. Is it worth paying life? Is my opponent likely to give their entire hand to protect their arsenal? If they are, do I want that? Sometimes that's worth it. Sometimes I want the tempo going into next turn. They will have nothing, and I'll have all of my cards to play with. Sometimes I don't want that. Sometimes I know that I'm going to want to block next turn. So I'm going to pay life for destruction, guaranteeing their arsenal gets hit, pushing them to be more likely to keep cards in hand. I'm already losing my arsenal anyway, so I might as well blah 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 with my hand instead of blocking. So Widespread Destruction gets very complex. Well, let's look at Cull. If they don't know about the Cull, do I pay life and kind of give it away? Here comes this Cull, I'm paying life. Why am I paying life? Because I need you to take damage. If it is revealed, maybe I'm doing that because I want them to guarantee the damage so I can guarantee Cull them. Maybe it's face up in Arsenal, so face up and banish. And when I attack them, I don't pay life, and I'm letting them decide. Do you want to give me your whole hand in blocking, or do you want to take damage and lose 1 card? So my opponent kind of gets some choice, and I can take some of that away by paying life. So it's really, really complex, and it's hard to assign value to, because like I said, I'm paying 1, so I'm going -1. If I get 1 Runechant out of that, that's pretty easy to understand. But the contextual value of culling your opponent, or getting their arsenal, pretty hard to understand. Is it worth it? Do they care? Are they going to block anyway? Let's look at Funeral Moon again. I'm going to keep talking about this card because I love it. So it's worth 1 resource, blocks 3, and it makes 1 Runechant. But is that one Runechant really worth one? Well, maybe not. Like we said, one Runechant can be the difference between attacking and not. So if I have one Runechant, and I play my Funeral Moon, and now I have two, and then I attack with a Runegate, maybe that Funeral Moon was worth a little bit more than one. It's also kind of worth -1, because it can deal me damage with Blood Debt, or I can pay life with it. So, is it worth -1? Is it worth +1? Is it worth 3 block? Or is it somewhere in the middle? It's very complex. This is why I like Funeral Moon. It does a lot of things. It can block 3, which is pretty good. It can make a Runechant, which can be worth more than just the 1. I can pay life. I can hold it. I can move the value from turn to turn. So you see how Funeral Moon's getting a little bit more enticing, even though it has really terrible value on its face. Now, we're getting to the advanced section. So if you are not a dedicated Vynnset player, this is going to be a section that might not be great advice for you. If you're still getting the hang of the hero, you need to stick with counting value, making sure your hands convert, not wasting cards as much as possible. But as you get better at Vynnset, and especially once you start challenging the difficult matchups like Guardians, you need to realize that negative value is fake. There is no negative value. In so many of these slow matchups, we need setup turns. We can't berate ourselves and be upset about this negative value, because you just won't win if you don't do it. So on my first turn, I banish Deathly Wail, I play a Malefic, and I arsenal a Shadow Puppetry. The 4th card I block with, whatever, doesn't matter. Value of the turn, I'm taking a damage and getting a Runechant, so let's say that's 0. I'm putting out a Malefic, which is 2 Runechants over time, so let's say 2. Arsenaling a Shadow Puppetry, so 3. But all that value is next turn. The Malefic will trigger next turn, the Shadow Puppetry will be next turn, and the Deathly Wail will be next turn. So I'm getting a 0 value turn, in a way, so that next turn, I get this huge one. My Deathly Wail comes in for 7, 8, 9, 10 with the Runechants. I close the chain. I've got my Malefic Runechant for make a 3rd. I come in with Banshee for another 10. So I've got up now to 20. And then I do an Eloquent Eulogy and get 24. And then I get an Eloquence. So I'm getting somewhere towards 24, 25 value. I've also got Overpower in there. I've got an on-hit in there. So I'm getting some complex math. But you can see how that 0 value turn turned into a 12 value turn, because I did 24 damage next turn. So it was 12 average, or was it 0 and 24? In the slow matchups, I'm going to be more likely to consider that 0 and 24. I'm going to give my opponent the tempo. They can do whatever they want with their hand. I'm going to give them my life. I'm going to play Blood Debt. I might even waste some cards. Sometimes they don't attack. I have 4 cards in hand, and I banish 1, play Malefic, Arsenal Shadow Puppetry. 4th card just gets wasted. But you need it to win. So let's not be afraid of negative value. In fact, is it worth counting? Is value worth counting in Vynnset? Like I said, it's a complex and contextual deck. If I'm bothering to count value all the time, is that going to make me better or worse at the hero? In some matchups like Syndra, I'm getting attacking and blocking value pretty much every turn, hopefully every turn, and it's pretty good to count that. So I might get 9 block if I'm blocking with 3 cards, and then I banish and play a 1-card Runegate for, let's say, 8. So I'm getting a massive 17 value turn with my hand of 4 cards. They're getting less than that, especially since I'm stopping their on-hit draws. So that is, obviously, a good way to beat Syndra. If at the end of my Talishar game, the little number in the corner says, you had 17 value per turn, and they had 10, pretty obvious who won. But against Victor, or other Guardians, if it's not more than 12 damage, I really shouldn't bother attacking at all. They're going to block out, and next turn, I'm not going to have those resources. I need to spike. Is it worth counting in that matchup? If this turn I was -1 and this turn I was +24, so let's count that as 23 over 2 turns or 12 over 2 turns or whatever. It doesn't really seem productive to me. Let's think instead, if I'm runegating every turn I win, that's my macro game plan. This is how I win the game. That's consistency. If I need to set up large turns, I'm going low value, high value, low value, high value. That's my macro strategy for that matchup. I'm going to get another video about macro, maybe the next video, maybe in a few weeks, because it's really more valuable than this math stuff in Vynnset. Instead of worrying about my value per turn, I'm thinking about how do I win this game. But I can't do that until I understand the math. Just like in high school, you need to understand the basic stuff, and then when you're in university and college, your professor's going to tell you that everything they told you in there was pretty much wrong. Very similar in the sense that if I do not understand the basics of Vynnset math, if I don't understand how to use my hand properly, how to get value out of my rune gates, how to convert my cards, I can't start thinking about my macro strategy. How do I beat this deck? What position am I in? Is it time to go? Is it time to slow? That sort of stuff. Let's think about this stuff instead. So instead of worrying about my math, I've got my macro strategy, which is going to include things like what's in my deck? What are they likely to do? What's my opponent likely to do to me next turn? What's my plan next turn? Am I taking another setup? Am I doing a big combo? And what's my plan over several turns? So if I'm looking into my deck and I think I haven't drawn a dirge yet, maybe I don't really care about going to 0 Runechants next turn, because I'm somewhat likely to draw a dirge. Or if I have my Vexing Quill hand, it's the same thing. Maybe it's time to go off Runechants this turn, because I know I can break that glass in case of emergencies. Or draw a dirge, because it's somewhat likely at this point. Maybe I've got 20 cards in my deck, haven't seen a dirge, very likely to see one. On the other hand, I have reduced a Runechant in my deck. I need a Runechant to play it for free, otherwise its value is very bad. So, how do I get that to happen? Well, I have to keep one going into my next turn. Maybe I know I have 3 reduced to Runechants left in my deck, or even better, I've got 1 in my arsenal. It's guaranteed. Is it worth attacking with my Flail to do 1 and 1, 1 Runechant, 1 physical? Well, maybe it's not. Maybe it's worth keeping that Runechant guaranteed and not risking it with the Flail attack. Maybe I haven't seen go-agains. I'm trying to set up these big combos and I have 4 go-agains left in my deck of 20 cards. Somewhat likely to see 1 next turn, maybe even likely to see 2 next turn. So I need to plan for that. What if next turn I still don't draw them? Well, that's a really unfortunate mishap, but it means I'm more likely to draw them again next turn. What about Revel in Runeblood? I have Revel in Runeblood in my deck. I haven't seen it yet. That's my macro strategy, is to spike with these Revels. Maybe I've got 2 of them. I need to keep waiting. And Revel's only really good if you've got a card in Banish, a spare attack. So I need to take a setup turn, set a spare attack, and then keep it until I get my Revel. So that's, once again, way more valuable to think about than, is this turn going to be worth 12? It's going to be worth 10. It's going to be worth 11. Don't really care about those nitty-gritty numbers. Let's go back to Funeral Moon one last time. So it's 1 resource. It's -1 life. I can pay life. It blocks 3. It's worth 1 Runechant. That's contextual, of course. What if I'm using that 1 Runechant to double gate? So I'm getting a second Runechant in order to use my Runegate cards. Now it's worth a lot more. Am I arsenaling Funeral Moon? Now I can bait my opponent into attacking me with a CNC. I can play Funeral Moon in response. So their CNC is going to be worth a lot less. Do I have a Mordred Tide? Now when I try and make my Runechant, I'm going to make 2. That's worth a good amount. That can help me double gate. Do I have an Eloquence token? Suddenly my Funeral Moon might be worth go again and a Runechant and a double gate. Suddenly it's worth a lot. Now it unlocks the second half of my turn. Now this Funeral Moon is the key to doing another 10 damage. So you can see how Funeral Moon goes from being a low value card to a card with high context to a card that is all context. And it's never bad, which is why I still run it to this day. Funeral Moon is just never bad. So here's some thoughts to close out the video. Vynnset is not a math deck. If you really like doing math and you like having a slightly bigger number than your opponent, play Florian or play a Guardian. Maybe don't play a Guardian, that's not a good advice. Maybe play a Ninja, play Ira. You're going to get a higher number than your opponent on your average turn. You're doing tempo, really. But if you don't really want to do math, you want to have spike turns, you want to have small turns, and you want to be complex, Vynnset's going to be better. You need to do less math in Vynnset and more macro strategy, which I'm going to get a video on at some point. And don't get so worried about negative value. Funeral Moon is not a bad card. It doesn't go negative value. Paying life is not that bad. It's not worth worrying about. Your life is going to be your best resource in Vynnset. Instead of worrying about it, spend it. And just accept the macro of Vynnset. Don't worry about the math. If you're here to play Vynnset, you need to accept these things and use them to win, instead of trying to bend Vynnset into a math deck, which is not really. That's the end of that video today. It ended up being a bit longer than I thought it was going to be, but I had a lot of fun making it. If you'd like to see my comics, they're there on the left. There's one about Vynnset. If you watch this whole video, you probably like her. You can see me on Twitter if you want. I'm not there often. And better yet, you can join the Discord with the link in the description below. By doing that, you'll find lots of Vynnset players. There's almost always someone chatting in that Discord, and usually it's about Vynnset. Lots of good questions come in, and lots of good answers are done as well. So I really, really recommend you go there. If you have other questions, you can of course comment them down below, and I'll see if I can get to them for you. Have a good day, and be good.